Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, like most problems in this country, Liberals are the cause. Because over the past 7 years, it feels like they've removed common sense from the dictionary. They'll try to deny it, they'll try to shift blame. They've blamed out-of-practice travelers for delays, backlogs, and the travel-associated horror stories that we see coming out of Canadian airports right now, even for domestic flights. Certainly their globally outdated mandates, red tape bundled policies, and general lack of compassion isn't at fault. No. They're vindictive, they're smug, and their leadership is power-hungry, and their government is the root of the problem. Speaker, if I haven't been clear enough already, the rest of the world is moving past the pandemic. Even Canada's provinces have learned to live with COVID, but our federal government has not. This is no longer about safety. It definitely isn't about common sense. It's about control. Once the Liberals took control, they didn't know what to do with their newfound power, and Canadians have suffered long enough for their half-witted initiatives. It's way past time for Canada to return to pre-pandemic rules and service levels for travel. Lack of staff is not an excuse. They've had plenty of time to plan for reopening, just like they've had years to plan for passport renewals. Another thing the Liberals have dropped the ball on. Hard. Speaker, I'm hearing from many constituents about the delays that they are experiencing at the passport office, how people wait for hours in line to get to the door just to be told to go home. And then they phone, and the phones ring and ring and ring, but they never get answered. And I'm also being told that Passport Canada is no longer accepting electronic documents and is telling people to go to their MP's offices to print the documents. So where's the common sense in that? But it gets worse, a lot worse, and I wonder who or what the government will blame next for the mistakes this time. Speaker, the provinces have dropped their mask mandates, yet federal buildings still require people to wear a mask regardless. So for people who wait in those long lines at passport offices, sometimes for hours, they get to the door and then they find out that they're required to wear a mask in order to get service. And then when they get inside and they find out they need a mask, guess what? The federal offices have none to give them, so there's none anywhere to be found. So what's a person supposed to do? Well, people are sharing masks. Multiple people, strangers, using the same mask because the government refused to have a plan. Now, I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure that wearing a used mask and someone else's mask is far worse than not wearing a mask at all. And it seems that the Liberals prefer to have conflicting, arbitrary rules that cause outrage and confuse people. Speaker, do you want proof, more proof of Liberal political theatrics? Well, the drama teacher in charge is ready to act stern and frighten Canadians into compliance. Afterwards, when the cameras are all turned off, he's happy to rip off his mask and smile, socialize, and jet set around the world like restrictions no longer exist. One set of rules for the people in power and one set of rules for the rest. But Speaker, the rules are different for people like Julie from my riding. She did the responsible thing. She applied for her family's passports months in advance of their trip. But since then, Service Canada has delayed responding to her inquiries, sent her for new passport photos multiple times, and told her that she needs to pay $95 per person just to speed up processing times. Well, the government is using the backlogs caused by their own incompetence to extort Canadians who played by the rules. Simply shameful and unbelievable. And again, no common sense. Now, if you thought that passports was a wild ride, well, it gets far worse. Let's take a look at what the Liberals have been doing to boaters. Southwestern Ontario is bordered by the Great Lakes, and my riding of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex sits on the beautiful southern shores of Lake Huron, and other parts of my riding are along the St. Clair River and Lake St. Clair. As boating season starts, boaters are wanting to go across the river to Michigan. Before the pandemic, the number of small vessel reporting sites was 400. Now that number has been cut to 84. And as boating season opens up, boaters will have to travel out of their way to report their vessel. Don't believe me? Well, constituents like John have written to me to say that instead of taking their boats across an 800-meter wide river to get to or from my riding and Michigan, the CBSA wants them to reroute for 76 kilometers round trip just to check in. This is ridiculous. John has calculated that it would cost him over $1,200 per trip just to meet this requirement. He's even calculated that this will create an extra 1,140 kilograms of carbon emissions just for one single trip for him. So the hypocrisy is that this government is pretending to care about the environment and Canadians, but in practice, they are needlessly adding emissions. And Speaker, I just found out minutes ago that the government actually announced that they're going to reopen those reporting sites, but that's only after Conservatives pushed them for this common sense restriction that's being lifted from promoters. Speakers, federal restrictions are being made and enforced without common sense. These mandates unfairly punish Canadians, and this government is giving no indication that they will ease off anytime soon. They have consistently missed the mark on marine travel, from Walpole Island Ferry in my riding that was shut down due to marine transportation not being included in cross-border travel exemptions earlier this year, to these recreational boaters that were not going to have points of access entry in this spring. But Canadians are being left behind. Continuing temporary closures for over 2 years is unnecessary, costly, and irresponsible. Speaker, when I previously asked the minister if they will allow CBSA's regular points of entry to be reopened, he laughed. And I'll spell that out again. Liberal ministers are laughing at the pain that they are causing Canadians. They are taking the joy in the prospect of crippled tourism and empty rural small-town shops during what would normally be a busy season and the busiest time of the year, hurting small businesses and communities in communities like Mitchell's Bay, Port Lambton, and Wallaceburg. This is not a joke. The behavior displayed by these ministers was despicable and very telling of how little a priority the concerns of my constituents are to this Liberal government. Did you know, Speaker, that Canada is the only country in the world where non-vaccinated people are not allowed to travel domestically? Let that sink in. That's not okay. Speaker, requiring a type of passport for Canadians to travel domestically, creating second-class citizens, needs to end. This government is going out of its way to punish fully vaccinated travelers, no matter if they cross by land, sea, or air. And I've had personal experience with this. When waiting in line for security at airports, watching people struggle with delays, and fighting the mandatory use of the barely functioning ArriveCan app, something that this government insists on using. And remember how I mentioned earlier how they would only take paper documents? Well, now they want an app, something that's totally digital, which is another decision that spits in the face of common sense loving Canadians. And Liberals, they refuse to compromise. They won't give people the choice to use paper or electronic documents, because that would make too much sense. Now, at the land border crossings, where what's happening late in the evening? Well, there's one overworked stall that's still open. Americans don't know about the ArriveCan app when they're crossing and the requirement to use it. The government has failed to explain to them to advertise what would be crossers of this requirement. And this makes for frustration and delays for tourists coming to support our economy and for Canadians returning home. For example, Speaker, I spoke with a senior couple in my riding who are fed up with how little is being done to help them. They're in their 80s, they're very cautious, they care about the rules, and they want to try and follow them. Now, they asked their son for help to buy a phone, their very first smartphone, something that they were forced to buy because they were excited to resume day trips across the border. But when they put the ArriveCan app on, it wasn't working and they didn't know what to do. So they told me that they took time, drove down to the store to see if the young clerk could help them. Unfortunately, though, they all tried, it still didn't work. They returned their new phone, they shelved their excitement, and returned home wondering why the government would make visiting loved ones for a day so hard for them. I know Conservatives are asking for the Liberal government to do something that's very difficult for them, to finally adopt some common sense, to listen to Canadians instead of themselves. People want their lives back, and one way to start giving them this is to return to pre-pandemic rules and service levels for travel. Speaker, everything this government touches is an absolute failure.
That's right.
And on behalf of all Canadians disappointed with how their plans are being ruined, I'll ask, if Canadians don't have a smartphone, can they get a smart government? Or at least one with common sense? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Oh, the honourable member for Guelph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I was listening to the honourable member across the way, trying to sort through the
obviously emotional comments she was making about the frustrations that she's feeling about the pandemic, frustrations that indeed many Canadians are feeling. I wonder if the member could comment on post-pandemic what the role of masks might play in preventing other diseases that might be passed from person to person.
The honourable member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the honourable colleague for his question. Speaker, we continue to follow the health advice of the provinces, and the provinces have medical health officers, and they are in charge of health care in this country. And my question to the member opposite and to the government, actually, is what information do they have that they're not telling the provinces? Why do they still have mask mandates in federal buildings when the provinces have removed restrictions everywhere across this country? Because I'm sure Canadians would like to see that information so that we know if they're hiding something from Canadians and from our public health officers in the provinces.
Here, here. Yeah.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Courtenay Albany.
Speaker, I really appreciate a lot of the comments from my colleague, and I too share her frustration. I mean, my office right now is getting absolutely inundated by people that are calling, that are waiting for their passports. Madam Speaker, the time that they're waiting at the airports as well is completely unacceptable, and we know that none of this is a surprise. People were planning on traveling as soon as the travel restrictions eased. I guess my question to my colleague is, can she speak about how important it is for the government not only to hire staff, but to ensure that the public service is fully, resourced, and that employees through the public service are paid good, fair wages, especially in a labour market shortage like right now?
The honourable member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his great question. Madam Speaker, my office as well has been very frustrated since the beginning of this pandemic. My office has turned into a Service Canada office, and we are happy to serve the people of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. In fact, I'm going to take the time right now to thank my staff who have worked tirelessly for constituents to help them with any of their needs while the Service Canada offices were closed. So thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, David. Thank you, Anna Marie. Thank you, Jordan. And I appreciate all of the work that they've done to help my constituents. And in the future, I would hope that the government would hire more people, reopen their offices, drop the mandates, and get people back to work in their offices so they can do the jobs that we are paying them to do as taxpayers in Canada. Restore the services back to pre-pandemic levels, and let's get on with our lives.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Abitibi, Bay James. Abitibi? Bay James, Nunavik, EU. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for her speech, but I do find it a bit strange that you're talking about masks and people using used masks. I realize that the government hasn't moved to prevent having a direct post-pandemic plan, but there are solutions that we can find for the situation in airports. So I would like to know why she's not supporting the experts who are telling us that we have to be vigilant because there could be another pandemic on its way.
Middlesex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for her question. Well, as far as I can see, the provinces, the experts at the provincial level have said that we don't need to have a mask mandate any longer. And it's a personal choice. If she wants to wear a mask, I'm totally fine with that. But I think it needs to go both ways. And we need to have respect for each other, continue to follow the advice which we see from public health officials, which says that we do not need to have these mandates any longer. But what we really do have a problem here in this place, Madam Speaker, is a real Liberal leadership crisis problem here, because that's the biggest problem right now. They're not showing leadership on this, and they need to do the right thing and drop all the mandates.